Chavov Sivan, the 26th day in the month of Sivan. And we are learning Tanya. We always learn Tanya on Sunday with Hashem's help. Okay, we're learning Tanya. Perik Yud Ches. Okay, let's go. Now, Rabbi say, as a teacher, in other words, somebody who looks at the classes from the angle of order and preparation. I know students don't look at classes necessarily the same way teachers do, for obvious reasons. 2 weeks ago, 2 classes ago, was Kedusha. And the most recent class was Chochmah. Those are the topics. The emes 3 classes ago was Kedusha. Last time we learned was sort of a little bit of Kedusha and a little bit of Chochmah. Last week was Chochmah. What we learned last week, Bekitze Niminat, in a few words, is that one of the key ideas of this Perek Yud Ches is what we call Pinta Leyid, the Nekudas HaYahadus, Yechida Shebenefesh. The Alter Rebbe calls it Chochmah Shebenefesh Elokis. Right? I've told this to you many times. In Tanya, you never have the words Yechida. Never. When Alter Rebbe wants to talk about Yechida, he uses the word Chochmah. He doesn't use the word Yechida. And he discusses how every Jew, from the greatest to the smallest, has a pintel of Yechida. So there's 2 points. Number 1, Kedusha. Every Yid has Kedusha. From one of the worlds, from one of the spheres. And number 2, inside that Kedusha, there's a pintel of Chochmah. And because inside that Kedusha, there's a pintel of Chochmah, every Yid has a place where Ein Sof could rest. Why? L'choira, Ein Sof is infinite. And a keli, a vessel, is Gevul. So this was the class that we had last week. Chochmah is the tool of going out of yourself. Chochmah is an inverse tool. It's a backwards tool. Chochmah is a kli to receive from what's higher than Chochmah, not by trying to hold, not by trying to control, but by surrendering. And therefore, Chochmah is a seat where Ein Sof could rest. And as I gave you the vod, it's so helpful in understanding this, that it says in last Mishnah in Shas, the Rebbe talks about this, and I spoke about it every week for the last few weeks. There is no kli that can hold the bracha that Hashem wants to give the Jewish people except for shalom. So the Rebbe asks the question, why the double negative? Loy ela. It should say, Matzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kli Machzik Bracha Yisrael. The Eibishter found the Kli which can hold the bracha of the Jewish people. V'hu HaShalom. And this is shalom. Why Loy Matzah ela? So the Rebbe says, because the bracha that the Eibishter gives Yidden is Likvul. It's Ein Sof. And Loy Matzah, there's no Keli that can hold Ein Sof, because Keli means borders, Ktsavis. Keli means Tfisa. It means you want to control. That's how people are. You want to control. You're learning something, you want to control it. Somebody gives you a gift, you want to be able to control it. If the gift that you were given is Ein Sof, you can't be toifes it. You can't hold it, you can't control it, because there's no borders. But Shalom is a kli. Shalom is a kli. Peace is a kli that can hold Ein Sof. Why? Because Shalom is bittul. In order to have peace, you have to get past yourself. In order to have peace, you have to surrender yourself to something which is bigger than yourself. And that's why it's a double negative. There is no kli that can hold the bracha that the Eibishter wants to give Yidden, because the Eibishter's bracha is beligavul, ela hashalom. Not that shalom is the keli. Shalom is a different type of keli, because it's a kli of bittul. And the same is true here. Chochmah is the seat of Ein Sof. Now here's what's going to happen. It's only 6 minutes and 58 seconds into the class, and we're already going to text. This is for us, grois and nice. Okay? Now we're going to reread last week's piece. I'm going to reread what I read in the class last week, and we're going to move on. Okay? That's what we're doing. I'm segueing. In other words, I repeated the last week's class, and I'm setting us up to move on. Which means we're on Chav Gimel on base. That means page 46. Okay, and we'll start from the Alpha Pikain. 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 lines from the bottom of the page. Alpha Pikain, nevertheless. It's a mamish mitnaniya. Because I'm just reviewing. I'm reading inside what I just told you, Baal Pep. Alpha Pikain, nevertheless. Because Shehi, that a Yid has a point of Kedusha, which is Me'eses Sfiras Kedoshes. The key word here so far is the word Kedusha. Every Yid has a point of Kedusha from one of the 4 worlds, from one of the 10 Sfiras.
How do you define Kedusha?
You're going to have to get the classes. This is 2 weeks worth of material. Kedusha means Davar Shabbatal Etzle Yizbarach. Kedusha means something whose self-identity isn't self, but the Eibishter. That's the definition of Kedusha. Kedusha doesn't mean I serve. Well, I guess you can say that. Kedusha means Batal Etzle Yizbarach. They steht in Tanya. He klula mikula. All points of Kedusha are connected, like we discussed about this business with the Amud. And then the Rebbe gets in the new point. Gamei Chochma Dasi. You connect it to Chochma. And there's 2 issues. The first is Kedusha, which means Bittel, and Chochma is more than Bittel. Chochma means a clean for Ein Safe. Okay, it's connected to Chochma Vasiyah, which is Melubish, Shebetecha Melubish, Chochma of Malchus Abatzilus. Shebetecha, Chochma Datzilus. So don't worry about all the Beteichas, okay? The bottom line is we have a point of Chochma, which is connected to all the points of Chochma until the original point of Chochma, Sheba Meir Ein Seif. And in Chochma there's a revelation, there's a radiation of Ein Seif, because the Keli of Chochma is a Kli of not Keli. Kidiksiva, that's written in the Pasuk, Adei Shem der Eibishter, B'chochma Yossi Haaretz. The Eibishter founded the world on Chochma. V'kula, moreover, B'chochma Sisa, everything was created with Chochma. That means that there's an investment of Chochma in the world, and it's in the Neshama of a Yid. V'nimtza, therefore, Ki Ein Seif Baruch Hu, the infinity of Elokus. Milu b'shbechinas Chochma shebenefesh ha'adam is revealed, is present in the level of Chochma in the neshama of person. Yihi Yemishi, Yihi Yemi Yisrael. Doesn't make a difference what kind of a Yid this is. This is called the Pintel Yid. This is called the Nekudas Yahadus. Now, when you're talking about Pintel Yid, there's 2 concepts of Pintel Yid. Then Ritz Hashem in the next Pedig Yates, which is around the corner in Chedesh Tishrei. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get there. The Alter Rebbe is going to discuss this again, more about Ichis. It's mentioned also in Chavdal, but in the next Pedig, this is going to come up more elaborately. There's 2 concepts of Chochma. Number 1, there's Chochma, which is in the Mayach, in the brain. And the number 2, the Chochma, which is Masvashetes B'chol HaGuf Kulei. Chochma, which is in the brain, radiates to the whole body. Those are 2 separate ideas. Every Yid has a Mayach, has a brain. The right side of the brain is Chochma, the left side of the brain is Bina, the back of the brain is Das. In the right side of the brain, which is Chochma, there's the presence of Ein Seif. The Chochma, which is in the right side of the brain, radiates to the whole body. But this is where it gets interesting. Let's read it inside first of all. Bechinas HaChochma Shabbat. The idea of Chochma, which is in the Shama. Imer Ein Seif Baruch HaMelubish Ba. With the Ein Seif, which is inside this Chochma. Mispashetes B'chol Bechinas Nefesh Kulu. It radiates, it shines, it extends in all different aspects of the Neshama. To give her life, from the head ad bechinas ragel till the foot. As the Apostle says, Chochma gives life to her host. Her host means to the guf. Now the word is azoi. I'll use this form. Yeah. This is from Emmanuel Shachad al Vasham. He was a public speaker. We were baching him. Who would we listen to? We listened to the public speakers that came before us, yeah? So Emmanuel Shochet is one of the best listens. So he has an expression that he uses in a lot of his talks. A cardiac Jew. A cardiac Jew means a Jew who has his whole neshama in his heart. And he says a cardiac Jew is a dangerous thing. He says too much pressure on the heart. The heart could explode. You have to have kolatzmei say taiman. The Jew in the heart has to radiate to all the limbs. This was his part. This is his way of putting it, yeah? So, based on the Gemara says, if a person has Torah in his mind, he forgets it. But if the Torah fills the whole person, the Torah takes over the whole. Like we say, davening, not just my heart, but my arms and my legs and my fingers and my toes. If every part of the person says Hashem Yechamaycha, then you're a Yid. Then you don't forget it. So there's the Jew in the heart, and there's the Jew which radiates to the whole person. And in Krishma, this is b'chol avavecha, b'chol nafshecha. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol avavecha. Love Hashem in your heart. B'chol nafshecha, the Mishnah says, afilu neteles nafshecha, it takes your life, which means how the neshama fills the whole guf. And B'chol Meidecha is even more than that. Not only it fills your heart, not only it fills your body, it fills your wealth. Your house is also Meisa Nefesh. That's the way the Mishnah is understood. So there's a Yid who loves Hashem in his heart, and this is how the heart radiates to the whole body. On the level of Yechidah, these are two ideas. Number one, the way the Ein Seif is in Chochmah as it is in the Moyach. And number two, the way the Chochmah, which is in the Moyach, fills the whole person. A person's Mesidas Nefesh, when the people are Meisa Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, Mesidas Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, it's not because the Chochmah is in the Moyach. It's because the Chochmah, which is in the Moyach, takes over the whole Guf. The Moyach can be Meisa Nefesh all at once. For the Guf to be Meisa Nefesh, the Guf has to feel the Mesidas Nefesh. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. There's the way the Chochmah is in the Moyach. Chochmah is a Kli for Ein Seif. So he does in his Moyach HaChochmah, in Ein Seif. And let's say, for the purposes of this conversation, this is B'chol L'Bavacha, I'm a Jew at heart. In my heart, I love the Eibishter. And then you have B'chol Nafshecha. How the love that I have for the Eibishter in my heart, the Epintel Yid, which is in my Moyach, is Mispashetet B'chol L'Kul, raised to the whole body. You'll see later, I don't want to do this now, you'll see later that it's complicated. The Chochmah, the way it is in the Moyach, is always there, and it's always present, and it's always available. But the second part, that the Chochmah should radiate to the whole body, this is a little bit involved in the Lashon Harav. Ukafisha yizbayel lakam. You're going to see this later on, but I'm just pointing out the steps. Step number one is kedusha. Step number two is chochmah. Step number three, that in chochmah you have Ein Seif, and step number four, the Ein Seif, which is in chochmah, fills the whole body. The details we'll see later, and I'm reading on. It occasionally happens that Mamshich and Peisha Yisrael, Yidden who are called Peishim, sinners, have Neshamis Geveyas made incredibly lofty Neshamis, Shahayu Be'imki HaKlipit, which are the depths of Klipa, to Meshikoso B'Sefer HaGul, like it says in Sforim of Kabbalah. Now, why this lands over here? You have this two lines, you have more or less, in the end of Pei Gimel, chapter 3, which is, I'm not going to say it's in the last millennia, but it's in the last decade. It's a long, we learned Pei Gimel a very, very long time ago. Also, the end of the Pei, where the Alter Rebbe throws in Azel Chaverte, which is Mamish Kabbalah Verted. And you wonder, first of all, what does it mean? And second of all, what is it doing here? I'm going to tell you what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say, I think. I mean, obviously there's Mefarshim here. There is such a thing as bigger neshamas and smaller neshamas. There is such a thing as higher neshamas and lower neshamas. Yeah, the fact. There's neshamas of Atzilus, there's neshamas of Bria, there's neshamas of Yetzirah, there's neshamas of Asiyah. There are differences between souls. And it's true that every one of these neshamas, from the greatest to the smallest, has Kedusha, and has Chochmah, and has Ein Seif. But that doesn't make all Jews equal. There are still going to be Yidden who are a much higher Madrega, and there are going to be Yidden who are in a substantially, we're learning Tanya, who are in a substantially lower Madrega. Hecher neshamas and Didik neshamas. So therefore, you could assume that a person with a higher neshama has more access to the godliness inside of himself, and accordingly is, so to speak, a better servant of Hashem, more effective, and more involved, and more consistent than somebody with a lower neshama. The Alter Rebbe's argument is, but even the lowest of the low has this spark. But now comes the next point. Normally, and of course you know what the word normally means, that there's also unusual, there's also not normal. Normally, the hishtashlos of neshamas makes sense. In other words, usually a person who's a tzaddik, his parents are mastama also tzaddikim. That's usually how it goes. Even though the Gemara says, Shleisha Shutzim Ba'adam, a person has three partners. Ha'av, V'ha'im, V'ha'kadosh Baruch Hu, there's the Eibish, the father, the mother, and the Eibish. The Gemara says, the father contributes this and this, the mother contributes this and this, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal by neshama, the Eibish that puts in the neshama. So, we don't get to choose neshamas. Parents don't get to choose neshamas for their children, even by tzaddikim. The Eibish that chooses what neshama is to go into this goof. It's still true that a whole of your parents, b'derech klal, ruba deruba, are mamshech higher neshamas, for all kinds of reasons. That's usually how it is. So if a person is a tzaddik, you can assume his parents are the stam tzaddik. And therefore, what we discussed here, about 4 worlds, and 10 spheres in each world, and neshamas that come from higher worlds, neshamas that come from lower worlds, neshamas that come from higher spheres, neshamas that come from lower spheres. There's differences, all kinds of differences. And we presume that a higher neshama is going to be greater than a lower neshama. A neshama from a higher world is going to be greater than a neshama from a lower world, which practically means if your parents were gehoib in the Yidden, you'll have an advantage over people whose parents were einfach, plain, ordinary. The Alter Rebbe says, but it's not 100% true. Occasionally you see a neshama come from nowhere. That you have a neshama, the parents are, whatever they are, pashta mensch, not even frum people. And they produce a child with a neshama that's incredibly powerful. I mean, in our generation, this is normal. This is what used to be normal is now abnormal. People, the kids who are raised in homes, nishka Shabbos, nishka kosher, nishka tara, and they have these incredibly powerful neshamas, because it's still true that HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal ben neshama. That means, even though usually greater parents who are on a higher level, who are serving Hashem in a purer way, are going to have children that are going to be like themselves. But the fact still remains, the parents don't pick the neshama, the Eibishter does. So occasionally, there's, so to speak, a mismatch. Parents who are on a very low madrega have a neshama of a very high madrega. You know, there's a Yid, his name was Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Mastam, you heard of him. You're going to find it, Chizkiyahu HaMelech. And his wife was the daughter of Yeshaya Novi. Yeah. They had a son who was a Rosh Hashanah. Menashe Melech Yisrael. And the Gemara says that Chizkiyahu knew that the son was going to be a Rosh. And he didn't want to get married, and he didn't want to have children. And Yeshaya told him, Mishlech nicht nemeibishnes Geschäften. So he married Yeshaya's daughter, had a son Menashe. And Menashe was one of the words. The Mishnah says, Eilech, Eilech, Leila Mabah. How does such a thing happen? Obviously there's an explanation. I don't know what the explanation is, but there is an explanation. So this is going in the tzad connected, in the negative. Now the Rebbe says sometimes it happens in the positive also. That a neshama from a very, very high madrege ends up by parents who are very plain or even lower than that, and that neshama comes into this world with incredible koyach. Because seif kol seif, in the end, the neshama comes from Hashem. Parents have a lot to do with the personalities of their children. Parents certainly have a lot to do with how they raise their children. But in the end, the neshama comes from the Eibishter. And therefore it's possible you have a child. He was abused and he was neglected and he came from a crazy house and he turns out to be a big chassid. It happens. It doesn't make sense. L'chayre has every reason to be a failure of a person, and he's not. And sometimes the reason is because he has an incredibly great neshama. The Alter Rebbe is throwing this in here. Since we discussed the idea of neshamas coming from different worlds and different spheres, higher and lower until the lowest of the low, he says you should know that seif kol seif, since in the end HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal ben the neshama comes from Hashem. Sometimes people who are at a very low madrega have a child who's an incredibly high madrega. But he explains it in Kabbalah words. Because shahoyu bim kaklipes, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, it's not the pshat. The Eibishter wakes up one day and says, okay, I got this great neshama. Ich fashik him in Golas. I'm sending him off to be by a home of people who are not Shemesh Shabbos, who are not Echel Kosher, they don't even know that they're Jewish. Let that neshama find its way back. That's not the pshat. That's not the only part of it. The pshat is that neshamas get entangled. For all kinds of reasons, it's possible for a high neshama to have fallen bim ki aklipis from an earlier gilgul, from an earlier time, from an earlier something or other, and that's why it comes out this way. So in other words, there's 2 parts to it. The first part of it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal ben neshama. Since the Eibishter gives us a neshama, he chooses what neshama to give what person. So therefore, sometimes the Eibishter wants a very high neshama ends up by parents that are plain. But Kabbalistically, the reason that happened is because that great neshama was trapped. That great neshama was trapped. That great neshama was trapped. And the only way to untrap it was through this process. I'm going to tell you a story that Rebbe, I pray to God I don't regret telling the story. I'm not going to say any names. I heard it probably close to 40 years ago. The Rebbe was standing like in Shabrach in the 70s. When the Tilt Vang, remember the Rebbe? He looked at you, looked at you, looked at you, and you had to, the women didn't get Kesha Bracha, but you wanted the Rebbe's eyes to touch yours, but you wanted to make sure it didn't miss your cup, so you had to He looked at you first. First he looked at you, and then he said, L'chai Rach, I was pouring it in your cup. So you had to stare at the Rebbe, and after the Rebbe looked at you, then you look at your cup and make sure that you don't cause the wine of the Rebbe to spill. A Yid walks by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe leans over and says, I'm giving you a bracha for a child. He says, I don't want one. And the person behind him in Lime says, I'll take it. I'll take it. Ich will nicht. And the Rebbe turns, you sure? Dr. Ja. Anyway, the story has a hemshech. This is a shrekliche Maise. It's mamish a shrekliche Maise. The Rebbe leans over, offers a person, he wasn't a Lubavitch, although even he was through him. He came to Keshe Bracha. The Rebbe offers him a child. He says, I don't want it. So the guy next to him, who was a from a Yid, the Lubavitch, he says, I'll take it. I heard the story many years ago with names, and I know who that child is. Trust me, it's a shrekliche Maise. It's a shrekliche Maise. When you read these few lines, that we don't know cheshbonis. What's going on? The Rebbe is handing out the shamas. And the Rebbe says, "You sure?" Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even if I wouldn't know the names and the details, the whole idea that the Rebbe offers somebody a baby, he says, "I don't want it." Next he says, "I'll take it," and the Rebbe says, "Really? Yeah, mamish, you want it?" Like in other words, the Rebbe has sort of indicated it's not so simple. The Eibishter K'Vayachal is not the Geschäft. We don't understand how the Neshamas come into this world and how they travel and how they journey and how they struggle and how they fulfill their mission on this earth. Okay. I want to tell you a second story like this also. Maises mit Neshamas. So we're going to continue. Hine. I'm just reading a little. Okay, I'm not reading a lot. I'm reading a little. Hine. We're in the middle of talking about Chochmah. We're in the middle of talking about Chochmah. The Rabbi interrupted with a 2-line bracket, which I chose to explain a little bit. So now I have to go back to Chochmah. You know, what I'm asking you to do is to put what I just said on a shelf and go back to the shelf before. The Alter Rebbe is explaining Pintel Yid, and he called it Ava Mesuteres, hidden love. He says every Jew has Pintel Yid because he has Kedusha, and because he has Chochmah, and Chochmah is a keli for the Pintel Yid because Chochmah is the tool of detooling. Chochmah is the tool of getting past self. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to say it in words. In other words, what I told you last week, we're going to read now inside. Hine. Ha-Chochmah, Chochmah, which is translated in English as wisdom. He mekeid ha-seichel v'havon. It is the source of wisdom and understanding. V'hi l'mayla me'habina. It's higher than understanding. Shuhu, because understanding is havonas ha-seichel v'haslagosei. Understanding the seichel, the intuition. V'haslagosei. The literal translation of the word hasaga is to reach it. To reach it, right? They have in Bina you have a lot of words. You have hasaga, which means to reach. You have tfisa, which means to grasp. You have achona, which means to discern, and you have avana, which means to understand. A lot of words for Bina. Hasaga means to dergerechen, onzukommen, to reach it. And the Rebbe says a second time, v'achochma, and chochma is l'mayla me'avana v'hasaga. It's before you understand, and before you intellectually reach the idea. V'hu moker lahen, and chochma is the source of what you're understanding in Bina. And then the Rebbe concludes, V'zehu lashin chochma. This is actually the meaning of the word chochma. The word chochma means koyach ma, the tool of ma. Right? Where did we have this? Yesterday they had no balkeira in shul. B'chnepach b'givana balkeira of the elder. I laid kerach. V'arein mahu ki salinu olav. This is today's chitas. Arein, he is ma. What do you want from him? So you have the word ma more than once in the Chumash. In Parashat B'Shalach you also have v'nachnu mo. In Parashat B'Shalach, Moshe Rabbeinu says me and Aaron together are mo. The meaning of the word mo is bittul, garnished. Mo is a word, and it doesn't mean what. Mo, it means what is a I don't know what's the precise English word to describe every part of a sentence. So the what is a question. I don't know how that fits into the greater, all the details of a question. But the word mo in this case is a noun. It's a thing. Arin mahu, nachnu ma. We are the entity called ma. Ma means bittul. Ma means my entire reality is not myself. So koyach ma. Koyach means the tool, not the strength. The tool of ma. It's the tool of getting past myself. We all have an ego. We all have a form, and that's very, very important. If you don't have an ego, you don't have a form, you can't learn. Our ego and our form are very, very important. It allows us to trust ourselves, it gives us a little bit of confidence, it allows us to do different things in the world, and so on. Those koichos, those tools that we use, that are predicated on our form and our ego, begin with Bina. Bina is called the koyach of Yeshus, of me. Chochmah is the exception. It's koyach, it's the tool of ma, of bitl. And this was last week's conversation. Chochmah is what happens when you run out of known solutions. You have a problem, you want to solve it. How do you solve it? You look at the earlier problems that you had and how you solved them. What happens if you try every single problem and you've applied every single solution and you cannot? So you have to create a new one. But you don't have any more. You tried all the formulae, all the tricks that you know from your experience. You've tried and they've all failed you. How am I going to solve this problem? So there's a koyach ma, a tool of being frustrated, a tool of not knowing. In Higoyin, in philosophy, would say it's the tool of breaking my brain, breaking everything I knew until now. Like the Gemara says that Rabbi Zeta wanted to learn Talmud Yerushalmi, he made himself forget Talmud Bavli. Rabbi Zeta made himself forget the Talmud Bavli. So the Rebbe says, and what happened in between the time that he forgot Talmud Bavli and he came to understand Yerushalmi? He was in a state of Sheva Yipul Tzadik. He went away from Talmud Bavli, he lost that. To Talmud Yerushalmi has not yet arrived. He was not in a comfortable situation. But that's the koyach of ma, to let go of what I had, because that's the only kli for what I desire. If I'm going to move on to something else, you need to have to let go before. Koyach, it's a tool. A yid has a tool in his toolbox. I have an ability to surrender myself. I have an ability to put myself aside, which is it's an interesting thing. A human being has a koyach, because he has a tool that allows him to understand, and a tool that allows him to feel, and tools that allow him to sense. He has a tool to push himself aside. And by pushing himself aside, he opens himself up to things that are beyond him. What we call the flash, the barak hamavri, you say David, the enlightenment. So you see, Chochmah has two parts. And we talked about this at length last week. There's what I do and what happens. What's the act of Chochmah? The act of Chochmah is being frustrated. The act of Chochmah is admitting that I don't know. The act of Chochmah is the agony of not knowing. The act of Chochmah is feeling like I have a problem and I have no solution and I have no idea how I'm going to get a solution. And then there's a flash. It's a gift from the neshama. It's a gift from the subconscious, from the neshama. It's called Barak HaMavrik, a lightning flash. In Kabbalah it's called Yosoid Abba, the Yosoid of Chochmah. In Chassidus it's called Nekudas HaSkala, the point of light of an idea which comes from the neshama to the brain. You grab it, because it's going to go away in 5 seconds, and you study it. The grabbing it and the studying it is already the process of Bina. The fact that there was a frustration, and the fact that because of this frustration, this enlightenment came, these are the two parts of Chochmah. But the koyach, the tool, the part of Chochmah that which I have control over is not the creation of the flesh. That's a gift. The part of Chochmah I have control is the surrendering. It's the saying, everything you understood until now is nothing. And there's an agony, there's a pain, there's a frustration in that. And that's the kli for the new oil, for the new flash. Let's read Nachabisale. Okay, V'zehu Lashon Chochmah. That's the translation of the word Chochmah. Koyach, I'm transcending the word koyach as a tool, like a hammer is a tool and a wrench is a tool. We have a tool of intellectual surrender, of ma, of bitl. Shehu ma, it's the idea that she'enei musig move, that I don't have access, I can't reach it, and I can't understand it. Ve'enei nitvas b'hasoga adayin, it's not yet coming down into what I am able to reach yet. This is called Chochmah and this is called Bina. So the Alter Rebbe says, and now I'm putting words into the paper. We talked about Chochmah and Bina and Pei Gimel. And over there also, it's very hard to understand. The words of the Alter Rebbe and the Tanya are very, The Yossi is here, but if you read the Chumash without Rashi, it's very hard to understand what the words mean. But the Alter Rebbe discussed it in Pei Gimel, he preached it again here, that Chochmah is the tool that's before Seichel that brings Seichel. No. If it's before Seichel, how does it bring Seichel? If it brings Seichel, how is it before Seichel? And the answer is, Bina means understanding. Bina doesn't mean understanding once I understand. Bina means the entire process of trying to understand. But I have to understand something. So if I have a teacher, my teacher decides that I'm going to understand. If I have a book, the book decides that I'm going to understand. But if there's no teacher and there's no book to give me this information, how am I going to have it? And the answer is I get it from the Eibishter, I get it from the Neshama. The process of getting it from the Neshama is not magic. Sometimes it's magic, it's not magic. There's a tool, there's a koyach that gives a person control over the process. And that koyach is called chokhmah. Koyach ma! The tool that a human being has to go past what he knows and what he could possibly know with the tools of learning that he has until now to get something entirely new. And then the neshama gives him the flash. The flash is the schar, the flash is the reward for the frustration. So the action is an action of bid. So the Alter Rebbe now says one more line. V'lachein mislabish ba. This is why in her, that means in Chochmah, is the revelation of Ein Sof Baruch, of godliness. That even though the leis machshava tfisa bei klal, and I'm translating it the way I've translated all Pedic, we're not translating machshava as thought, we're translating machshava as vessel. Leis machshava, there is no kli, tfisa bei, that can hold the Eibishter, klal whatsoever, but there is a kli that can hold the Eibishter, and it's called koyach. Leis machshava tfisa bei klal ki im kavshem mislabeshes in chochma. Just like the Mishnah, Loi mata HaKadosh Baruch Hu keili machzik bracha Yisrael ela hasholem. The same thing. Leis machshava, there is no kli that can hold HaKadosh Baruch Hu ela chochma. Why is chochma the exception? Why could chochma hold Ein Sof? Because chochma is keach ma, it's the tool of good. So the Alter Rebbe interrupted with those two lines of Kabbalah, and then after the two dots, he goes back to explain Chochmah. In other words, on the previous page, the Alter Rebbe told you the mystical pathology. Yeah? Why do you have Ava Misateres? Because you have Kedusha and you have Chochmah and Tevin Tzavashen Chochmah. And here he told us the Chassidus, in the Lashon HaChassidus, how is Chochmah Kli for Ein Sof? Because Inyan HaChochmah is good. Go ahead. You wanted to say something?
There's a minor, it's hard to pronounce it,
Leis machshava tfisa bekal aval nitzvas iyu bereusa deliba. Right, and it says in Tanya, Leis machshava tfisa beklal, ki im kamish labeshes beteiro b'mitzviseha. So, how did I know your question? Because I thought of it before you asked it. Okay, there's a lot of kiyims. There's more than one kiyim. Leis machshava tfisa beklal kiyim. There's at least two. Reusa deliba is the same thing as this. A broken heart, the will of the heart, Mesiras Nefesh. But in Tanya Pedic Heidal, the Rebbe says, Mitzvahs iyu b'teiru mitzvahs. A Yid does a mitzvah, he's holding out for some hus. That's a different story. Right, okay, point well taken. There's a rule in questions. If the teacher knows the question, then he doesn't have to answer it. So I knew the question, so I don't know if there's more than one. There's a few. To me, there are two. In Samach Vav, the Magala is based on Samach Vav, is Ki im Berusa deliba. But in Tanya it says, B'teiru mitzvah. The Yid the mitzvah is holding Atmos and Masein Tzadok. But here it's Chochmah. Here it's Chochmah. Okay, any other questions or comments? So we're going to stop. For Tanya, this is a short class. I'll do a Yem Yem Namitzvah. 5 minutes we'll learn, okay? Thank you for coming.